I have been reserving my commentary on the actual judgment, content, output, etc. from this COP until now, until we've been able to really be able to talk to you live and answer some of your questions, because there's a lot that goes into it. I don't think I can always fit them into 15-second videos, but I do think it's really important for the sake of transparency for you all to know what's essentially happening in your name, right? Because whether you're in the United States or not, especially if you come from a Western country or a wealthier country, you likely have full diplomatic teams that are negotiating for you. And what are they negotiating for? What are they saying? What is actually happening in these meetings? I think is something that you all deserve to know. So let's start from the top. What is COP at all? Like, what even is that? So COP is short for the Conference of Parties. But what it really is the UN Climate Summit. It's the International Climate Summit. And so what the UN Climate Summit is and what COP is right now, each year is a different year. This is COP 26. So this is the 26th Conference of Parties to address climate change and overall the climate crisis. So, one of the big questions that I get asked is COP a joke? Is it useless? Is it just, the blah, blah, blah that, for example, Greta Thunberg says that it is? And I think that this is a really important question. So the thing with COP is that there's over 30,000 people that attend. There are different major segments of COP. There are the actual, what they call the political confab area of COP, which is those party-to-party negotiations. But then there's also overall grassroots conferencing and organizing that happens in COP, as well as discussion of emerging trends and technologies and other sorts of things. So I think with this question of blah, 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 the answer is like, yes, but there's a lot more to it than that. And I want to dig into it because I think it's really important that people understand that COP is important, even as we are disappointed by it. And this is why. Because my concern is that if people write off COP and if people think that it's just blah, 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 then we think that that's a reason to ignore it. And the thing is that these negotiations and the outcomes of these negotiations are too important for us to ignore, even when we think that the results are underwhelming. And that is why I think it's so important that, for example, what Fridays for Future is doing in organizing massive protests during the conference and around the conference is extremely significant. We need people in the streets and we need pressure in there. And what I found is that in those negotiations, what I saw were leaders, global leaders at the highest levels, being very concerned and nervous about public sentiment and opinion. And I think that that is a very, very, very positive development, because in prior COPs and in prior climate summits, I don't think that these leaders were as hot under the collar about what the public sentiment and what public opinion of the outcomes of their negotiations were going to be. And the reason they weren't really as concerned before is because people weren't watching as much before. And so I think it's really important that we continue to keep the pressure up, because I want you to know that it's working. And one of the things that I see in politics all the time, whether it's in climate, whether it's in evictions, whether it's in all these other types of areas. I even see it sometimes when people would protest outside of the steps of the Capitol, is that politicians pretend, that's the important word, they pretend to ignore protests. They pretend to not see protesters. They pretend to not hear them. They kind of like, you'll be a big picket line and people will just be walking across them, kind of ignoring them. But they can't ignore them. And it does get to them. And I saw people in these negotiations feel defensive about the allegation that they're just blah, blah, blah. And that these things don't matter and that they're not doing enough. And that defensiveness often results in them it pushes them to try even harder to prove that it's not just blah, blah, blah. And so I just want you all to know that even if in some of these final results, even if it's still not sufficient, even whatever they come up with is still going to be more than what they would have otherwise, because there is increasing concern about the criticisms of the results of these negotiations. And so I think that I just want you all to know that it is being heard and felt on the inside 100%. Even if the sentiment that's trying to get across is that they, oh, this is just a little thing that's happening. It's not a little thing that's happening. It very much is adding pressure inside of those rooms, because the thing is that there is a point of public opinion where if it gets so bad, it delegitimizes the institutions of governance, the institutions of finance, education, etc. Their legitimacy begins to be questioned. And if things are starting to be seen as illegitimate, then power starts to crack. It becomes a very big concern. So I just want you all to know that the protests are working.